Hi, I'm Tiana Shoei. I'm a writer, entrepreneur, leader, and energy. This is my podcast, Ain't Quite Right. Join me as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Shoei, and welcome to my podcast. Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. I've never actually explained why I picked that name. The gist of why I picked Ain't Quite Right, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right, for the name of this podcast is because once upon a time, there was a little girl named Tiana. And society told her over and over again, Tiana, you're bossy. Tiana, that's not how we do things here on planet Earth. You've got to conform to the way we do things here. Stop thinking for yourself. Stop doing that thing. Now, I'm saying this a little tongue in cheek, but this is very true. I got the greatest deal of freedom when I finally heard a female leader say, what if we stopped telling girls that they're bossy and started recognizing that they're just leaders that need to grow? And I was like, thank you. Almost every report card I got from elementary school was Tiana's running around telling everybody what to do. Nothing has changed. I'm just a bigger version of that. But it always came from a place of wanting to inspire and lead people. And I tried so hard to fit the formula of like, be a good girl, sit down, be quiet, do what you're told, just get your job done, stop asking questions, just show up, do your job and go home. I don't function like that. It's not healthy for me. It's not happy for me. Now, for some people, they love that. Some people love to just be told, this is what you do, sit down, do your job and go home. Not me. And so as I've stopped, when I finally got to the point in my life where I was mature enough to say, I've got to figure this out for myself. Like I've got to stop listening to everybody else tell me how to live my life. And I've got to figure out my life for myself. And I started learning and I started reading and I started gaining perspective on how the rest of the world thinks. I came to realize that what we accept is social norms. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not talking about, disregard being polite or disregard being a good human. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there is this outdated thinking in especially the American culture that is like you go to school, you incur a bunch of stupid debt, and then you go to work and you get a 40-hour week job that you may or may not like, and then if you have ambition, you follow all the rules and you kiss enough butt and then you get promoted and then you make more money and then you buy nicer stuff, and it's just this formulaic way of thinking and living. And then I started reading all these books and realizing, that's not true for everybody. That doesn't have to be true for me. I can actually be a unique individual and be a contributor to society in my way and not in the formulaic way that we've been taught. And as I went on this journey, I came to realize I ain't quite right. And I say that also to inspire you to be not quite right, to laugh, learn, and live big, to get out of this box that you've been put into because it's easy. It seems easy and it seems like common sense and conventional wisdom. But what I found is that not all conventional wisdom is wise. Not everything, I've said this in my last podcast, not everything you believe is true. So that's why I named it Ain't Quite Right, because I'm perfectly content and very happy with the fact that I don't do things the way that society says we should. And I don't think most people should either. It doesn't mean that we don't, again, use common courtesy and treat people with dignity and respect. Those things are unwritten understandings. But there's so many other things in society that we just don't do that. We just, what? And so that's why I wanted to talk about today's subject, which is courage. Courage is a really interesting topic because all of us, let me just ask you this. When I say the word courage, like, what do you think? Most of us think hero, right? Like you're like, oh yeah, that hero had the courage to do that thing. Some of my heroes, for example, are our founding fathers. It took a heck of a lot of courage when you've got a very powerful British force dominating dominating our both political landscape as well as just the physical landscape. I mean, there are British soldiers all over this country when our founding fathers had the courage to form a little homemade militia and fight against this very powerful country for our freedom. That's one form of courage. But courage takes on a lot of different forms. And all of us need to be in the habit of practicing courage, because there is no growth in the comfort zone. And so any area in your life where you're like, yeah, I think I'll just not, because that would require courage, is an area in your life you're neglecting for something bigger and better most of the time. So let me ask you this. Now, I know I always start and end with a quote, but here's the thing. I couldn't pick just one quote. So we're going to kind of go through a couple of different quotes because I liked them all so much. But let me ask you this before I go into the quote. When was the last time you did something that required courage? And I'm talking about like, not you get on Facebook and you're like, I hate this political person, because somebody's going to say something nasty. Like, if you want hate, just go take a political position on any social media platform. Anyone. It doesn't matter. You could say, it doesn't matter what you say about, there's always going to be somebody who has something to say back to you. Like, I'm not talking about that kind of courage. I'm talking about real courage. So I'm going to sprinkle some quotes in here because I think these are great. Let's start with Winston Churchill. That man had to have a lot of courage, because he had a huge, tremendous responsibility on his shoulders. And if you don't know who Winston Churchill is, he basically saved the UK and was the leader that got the UK through World War II. And he had a lot of demons. Winston Churchill dealt with severe depression, and he had to lead his people through one of the most difficult wars this world has seen, World War II, while battling depression and all the other things that come along with being a leader, a politician. So he says, success is not final, which is so true. Failure is also not fatal, but it is the courage to continue that counts. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Can you think of a time in your life where you needed to muster courage to finish what you needed to do? Courage comes in a lot of different forms, by the way. It can be trying something new. It can be dealing with a bad situation in your life. It can be going somewhere you've never been before. It can be trying a food that don't look quite right. When was the last time you did something that requires courage? So here's another question I have for you. How do you get courage? Have you ever thought about that? Like, how do you get courage? Well, from personal experience, as somebody who's done a lot of really hard things that required a lot of courage, like quit my job and start a business, record a podcast and put it out for the world to hear and judge, become a very outspoken believer, very outspoken Christian, knowing that we're slowly reaching a point in society where tolerance for Christian values has decreased because there's been a lot of misconception about Christian values. I think people that don't know, truly biblical Christianity and maybe just have perceived it from culture or whatever, they think if you're a Christian, you're a homophobe, for example. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And any Christian who is a homophobe isn't a Christian. Because Jesus said, my disciples will be known by their love. But there's this belief out there that Christians are homophobes or hate people that are homosexual, for example, which, there are some people who call themselves Christians who say very derogatory things about homosexuals. But I don't think that when it's all said and done, Jesus is going to claim them because they are not exhibiting what I would call the fruit of being a disciple of his. I'm not saying that from a judgmental perspective. I'm just saying, that there's a lot of misrepresentation of Christian values out there, but it takes a lot of courage as a business executive to be an outspoken Christian. Because again, there's a lot of misconceptions about what Christianity is. And so there have been some intolerances. I can understand the intolerance of not wanting to tolerate somebody that would be cruel or judgmental of somebody because of their sexual orientation. So I get it, but it's misguided, right? It took a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to get on my mountain bike every time I get on that bike. My bikes have landed me in the ER a few times. It takes a lot of courage sometimes, especially to hit sections that I've wiped out on before. Like I have to just push through. So how do you get courage? Well, I'll tell you how you get courage. You just do it. You just do it. You do the thing that you're afraid of. That's the way you get courage. You just do it. And you don't let fear hold you back. You listen to it. You say, yeah, I remember. I went around that corner, slid out, ripped my arm out of its socket. Yeah, I remember. But that doesn't mean I'm going to get off my bike and walk the section. I'm going to learn how to ride it so I don't fall. Yeah, I know that some people misunderstand what Christian values are, but it's not going to hold me back from sharing the most important part of my life with the world, because some people may misunderstand who I am as a result. Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to put a podcast out there, because I'm sure that there have been plenty of people who've listened and said, this girl's full of crap. And I'm sure you've heard me say things that you don't agree with. That's okay. We don't have to always agree to learn from each other, right? It takes a lot of courage. And you know the way that you summon courage? You just do it. So here's another quote from Coco Chanel. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know who this person is, but I like the quote. The most courageous act is still to think for yourself out loud. The most courageous act is still to think for yourself out loud. Getting up here and doing a podcast and being a content creator takes a lot of courage. Writing blogs takes a lot of courage. Being yourself takes a lot of courage, because again, as I started off this podcast, I ain't quite right because I stopped trying to fit into societal norms. I'm kind of a little hippie at heart. Come summertime, I'm going to be in cutoffs. I'm going to have flowers in my hair, and I just don't care. I dress in ways that are not like in fashion, and I don't care. I'm myself. I stopped trying to fit into society and wear what's popular and have my hair the way that everybody wears their hair, or, I just have the courage to be yourself, have the courage to be disliked. That is, by the way, one of my favorite books in the whole world, The Courage to be Disliked. It is such a great book. The most courageous act is still to think for yourself aloud. Okay, so why does courage matter? Well, apart from that great quote we had from Winston Churchill, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. Why does courage not matter? Why does courage matter? Well, as I said just a minute ago, there is no growth in the comfort zone. You can live a life without courage. You can live a life without doing hard things. You can. You're just not going to get very far. One of the things that's really sad to me is that we've gotten to the places of society where we avoid pain at all costs. Now, this is going to seem kind of like I'm going off on a rabbit trail a little bit, but I've been thinking about this today. I don't even know how, I stumbled across a video from the UK. And it was an interview from a gentleman who was working at a mental health hospital in the UK. And he had resigned, and he was a whistleblower because he was very deeply concerned about the increase in children that were coming through the hospital for gender dysphoria, and how they were getting younger and younger. And basically what was happening at this hospital is this was kind of the step before they went on to their final surgery. And so basically what he was explaining is the politics had become, don't ask questions, don't try to challenge us, don't try to see if there's a better solution, just check the box and let the kid go get their, sex change at a very young age. And he was saying, as a psychologist, that wasn't what their objective was. He said, lots of times what happens when you're going through adulthood and going through puberty, it's a very uncomfortable time in your life. And, so we've popularized this, this idea that if you're uncomfortable in your own skin, then the solution to that is that you must be a transgender and you must need to get a sex change. So the problem with that is that very rarely when somebody thinks that their problem is this little tiny thing. Is that the case? He said, usually, he said, we're very complex people. We have lots of dimensions to ourselves. And he said, so, my job is to help them see that the problem isn't singular. It's very complex. And I want to address and find out what all those things are so they don't go and make life-changing mutilations to their body before that they've had a chance to fully develop and figure out what what really is causing them pain. But he said also the other problem is what is normal adulthood. He said all of us go through an awkward stage growing up. I mean, do you remember what it's like to be a teenager? It's the worst. Your brain is like fried. Your prefrontal cortex is not working at all. Your hormones are through the roof. You have the expectation to start to figure out what your life is going to be like. You like some of the people that you're stuck around with, but most of them are just as big a little brats as you are because they're trying to figure life out. And the problem with the way that gender dysphoria has been morphed in society, and it was very fascinating listening to this doctor talk about this, is that now you have a group of people who are convinced that this natural process of growing up is as a result of their gender dysphoria. And if they just get a sex change, they're going to solve the problem. And really what it is, it's a complete avoidal of pain, but for more pain. He said that's the thing, is that it's worse. It's so much worse if you go through this sex change and you have all of these. He said the hormones are terrible. The surgery is painful. It is an extraordinarily painful process. And so these kids come in here convinced that the way around this awkward process that every human being has to go through is to change your gender. But that actually makes the problem worse. And the reason that I kind of went off on this tangent and what I thought about is I thought, wow, we have gotten to the place in society where we literally have convinced ourselves that pain is so bad, being uncomfortable is so bad, that we find more damaging ways of solving those problems. For example, exercising is uncomfortable, so I'm just not going to exercise. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life on drugs to solve the problem that eating a healthy diet and exercising could have solved. We have a tendency, again, to do instant gratification over thinking through the long-term ramifications. And when I was listening to this, I thought to myself, that is a prime example of what's happening. But now the consequences are bigger than just you're going to have to go on a diet and lose weight. Now you have people who, the suicide rate amongst transgenders, by the way, is 70%. 70% of people who transition commit suicide. Now you have parents who are not parenting their children through their teens and putting them into a worse situation, which most likely will lead to a much higher, breakdown of their existence. But this is just a small microcosm of what's happening on a larger scale across society. So social media is another example of this, where we sit down and we would rather sit and get the instant gratification of the likes and the instant feedback from people, telling us they like us, than growing up and learning how to socially interact. We enjoy the short-term benefit, the instant gratification, versus the longer-term ramifications. Not only is it creating unhealthy dopamine levels in the brains of these kids, but it's also not allowing you to forge deep neural pathways. If we continue on this path of being, phone and social media addicts, we're literally going to evolve as a species in a way that will not allow us to think deeply any longer. We are damaging our neural science, our neural pathways in our brains. We are regressing as a society as a result of this new instant gratification. We're not learning how to interact the way that humans are whether you are a creationist or a scientist, you believe in the Big Bang, whatever. By the way, being a Christian and believing in creation is not mean you're not pro-science, because, by the way, science backs up creation. You may argue with me on that, but I think it takes a whole lot more faith to believe that we had a cosmic accident that created life on the only planet we've been able to discover for, miles beyond our comprehension, or that some organism happened to land and turn into life. I'm sorry, that takes a whole lot more faith than to believe that a creative God created humans. So they're not, mutually exclusive. But whether you think that we evolved this way or were created this way, either way, we are not a species that were designed or have evolved to exist the way that we're existing. We're changing our environment quicker than we're adapting to it. So courage is important, because if you don't learn how to do uncomfortable things and do things that challenge you, we're going to continue to regress as a society. And I brought up these two bizarre examples to show you microcosms of what's happening in our society because we've stopped practicing courage. Which leads me to one of the other quotes that I fell in love with that I couldn't decide between the three. Courage is the most important of all the virtues because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. This is from Maya Angelou. Courage is the most important of all the virtues because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. If you can't learn to get over yourself, if you can't learn to be uncomfortable, if you can't learn to do things that are hard, you're holding yourself back from your potential in your future. And you're creating unhealthy behaviors and habits. So, that was, we kind of talked through, what does courage mean to you? When was the last time you did something that required courage? How do you get courage? Why does courage matter? And what are the consequences of not practicing courage? And I kind of hit on that a little bit. Consequences of not practicing courage are you're not going to grow. I love this quote from Ray Kroc. If you're green, you're growing. As soon as you ripe, you start to rot. If you're green, you're growing. As soon as you're ripe, you start to rot. If you can't learn to do hard things and learn to be uncomfortable and learn how to grow through those challenges, that's how we grow as humans. We grow through pain. Pain is the avenue of growth in our lives. If that's pain physically exercising, if it's pain denying yourself something that is not good for you in the long run, if it's pain making a mistake so you don't make that mistake again. Why do you think our pain centers are so well developed? Because the only way you learn as a little human not to do dumb things is to fall a few times and get hurt a few times to go, I don't think, mom and dad might be right when they said no about that. Pain is a healthy thing in our lives, and courage requires facing that pain, facing our fears. It's what allows us to grow. It's what allows us to see what we're really made of. What are you really made of? What are you really capable of? Let me ask you that. Do you really know what you're capable of? Or have you placed artificial limitations on yourself because you haven't had the courage to ask yourself what you're really made of? Where do you know you got a little bit more in there? You just haven't tapped it out yet. I guarantee you, if you would have told me when I first started running, let me put it this way. My first 5K, I finished it. I threw up on myself, and I was throwing up so violently that I peed on myself while I was at it. And that was in 3 miles. It took me 38 minutes to run those 3 miles, which if you know anything about 5K times, that's not fast. I'm not like racing. I'm just finishing. If you would have told me at the end of that 5K that I was going to run multiple 100-mile races at one time, I would have looked at you like I was crazy or I would have looked at you like you were crazy and I was crazy. Because I had these false limitations on myself that just because it was hard today didn't, meant that it was going to be hard forever. Everything's hard the first time you try it, most of the time. Like there are very few things like other than eating ice cream that are not really hard the first time you try it. But you just get better. You get more practice at it. It gets easier because you learn how to do hard things. So, courage is such a great tool in our tool belt, but we have to get it out and we have to use it. And I have to agree with Maya Angelou. Courage is the most important of all virtues because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. So here's my challenge to you. What area in your life do you need more courage? Should you be more consistently practicing courage? What area in your life are you like, I'm going to not deal with that thing. I'm going to try to find the short way around that. What area in your life could you practice a little more courage? And then do it. Because how do you get courage? You just do it. Not to steal from Nike, but you just do it. So just to go back and finish the other two quotes and then wrap up today's session. Success is not final. Failure is also not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And the most courageous act is still to think for yourself aloud. So thank you guys for tuning in. This has been Tiana Shoei, Ain't Quite Right. Until next time, you guys be well. Thank you for tuning in.
For additional content, including my blog and social media, see my website, tianashoey.com. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a review, and be sure to tell your friends and family, anyone else that you think might enjoy joining us on this journey. Until next time.